My name is Cora Marlowe. Or, at least, it was. Names are like anchors, mooring us to a time and a place, to a family. For the first 17 years of my life, my anchor was lodged firmly in the damp, fertile soil of Bridgeport, a city perpetually veiled in a soft, gray mist that rose from the Willamette River. Our house, a handsome but perpetually shadowed craftsman in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, was a world unto itself. It was a world that orbited a single, brilliant sun, my brother, Leo. Leo was 2 years older, a magnetic force of nature. He was the star quarterback whose photo was always in the local paper, the debate champion with a grin that could charm the ivy right off the old brick buildings of our school. My parents, in turn, were his devoted astronomers, their lives and conversations charting his every glorious trajectory. My father, a man whose quiet pride manifested in gruff pats on Leo's back, saw his own youth rekindled in his son. My mother, a woman who measured love in achievements, curated Leo's life like a prize-winning garden, pruning away any potential inconvenience. And then there was me. I was the quiet satellite, the afterthought. Where Leo was loud, I was silent. Where he commanded the center of the room, I found comfort in the corners, a sketchbook in my lap, my world rendered in charcoal and soft lead. I loved the way the rain slicked the streets into ribbons of reflected neon, the smell of moss growing in the cracks of the sidewalk, the quiet dignity of the St. John's Bridge rising through the fog. These were the things I drew, the silent poems I wrote to my city. My parents saw my art as a quaint hobby, a harmless distraction until I found a real path. "That's nice, honey," was the standard refrain, their eyes already scanning the room for Leo, for the real story. I didn't resent Leo. How could you resent the sun? You just learned to live in the shade. I loved him in the way a younger sister does, a complicated mix of admiration and a quiet, persistent ache for a fraction of the light he so effortlessly commanded. The day my world shattered began like any other drizzly Tuesday in April. The sky was the color of a washed-out watercolor. Leo was driving us home from school in his hand-me-down sedan, the one my dad had bought him for his 16th birthday. He was going on about a summer internship at a prestigious law firm downtown, a position my mother had been relentlessly campaigning for him to get. I was only half listening, the melancholic chords of a folk song filling my headphones, my gaze lost in the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers. I remember the blur of a red car running a stop sign. The world dissolved into a cacophony of screeching tires and my brother's sharp, panicked curse. There was a violent, bone-jarring jolt that threw me against the passenger door, and then the sickening, crystalline symphony of the windshield spiderwebbing into 1,000 pieces. My last coherent thought was a flash of surprise at the vibrant, impossible crimson spreading across my white shirt, followed by a profound, starless black. When consciousness returned, it wasn't a gentle dawn, but a harsh, fluorescent glare. The first thing I registered was the smell, a sterile, chemical clean that was the antithesis of Bridgeport's earthy, rain-soaked perfume. I tried to lift a hand to shield my eyes, but my arms were tethered by thin plastic tubes, anchored to humming machines that blinked with a cold, impersonal rhythm. A deep, seismic ache resonated from my torso, a pain so profound it felt as though my very core had been torn apart and crudely stitched back together. I blinked, my lashes feeling heavy as lead shutters. My mouth was a desert, my tongue a clumsy, swollen thing. I tried to call out, to ask the silent, terrifying question of where am I, but the only sound that escaped was a raw, pathetic groan. A woman in pale blue scrubs seemed to materialize at my bedside. Her face was a blur of professional kindness. "You're awake," she said, her voice soft. "That's good. You're at Bridgeport General. You were in an accident. I'm going to get your parents." I closed my eyes, a wave of relief so potent it was almost painful washing over me. Mom and Dad. They would be here. They would hold my hand, their faces etched with worry and love. They would make the scary, sterile world make sense again. But the people who walked into my room a few minutes later were strangers wearing my parents' faces. They stood at the foot of my bed, their shoulders slumped not with the weight of near loss, but with the weary posture of profound inconvenience. There were no tears, no rush to my side. My mother's purse was clutched in her hand like a shield. My father's gaze was fixed on a point on the wall just above my head. A doctor with a kind face and tired eyes stepped forward, holding a chart. "She's a very lucky young woman," he said, smiling at me. I tried to return it, but my face felt like a mask I couldn't control. "You went through a significant surgery, Cora. The impact caused severe internal injuries. We had to remove your left kidney, but you're stable. You're going to be okay." The words floated around me, failing to land. "Kidney? Gone?" I tried to ask about my brother, my voice a dry rasp. "Leo?" The nurse, bless her, brought me a small cup of ice chips. I let one melt on my tongue, the cold a small, sharp anchor in the dizzying sea of confusion. "He's fine," my mother said, her tone flat as if discussing the weather. "A few scratches, some bruises. He was wearing his seatbelt properly." The unspoken accusation hung in the air between us. "You, on the other hand, have made quite a mess of things. You'll be in here for weeks." There was no warmth, no compassion. Just an assessment of the trouble I had caused. My father finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Your mother's right. Just focus on getting better so we can put this behind us." The days that followed were a blur of pain, medication, and a loneliness so vast it felt like a physical presence in the room. The nurses were my only constant, their gentle hands and quiet reassurances a stark contrast to my family's fleeting, dutiful appearances. They would stop by for a few minutes each day, deliver updates on Leo's life. He was back at school. His friends were all asking about him. He was preparing his application for the internship, and then leave. The silence they left behind heavier than before they arrived. Leo never came. Not once. I made excuses for them in my head. They were in shock. They were scared. Dad wasn't good with hospitals. Mom was just trying to be strong. Leo probably felt so guilty he couldn't face me. I clung to these rationalizations like a life raft because the alternative, that they simply didn't care as much as I needed them to, was too devastating to contemplate. But the life raft splintered and sank one Tuesday night, exactly 2 weeks after the accident. I was trapped in that twilight state between sleep and wakefulness, the steady drip of the forum maddening metronome counting off the seconds of my confinement. The pain in my side was a dull, throbbing fire. Through the thin wall of my room, I heard hushed voices. My parents. And the doctor, Dr. Alastair Finch. I recognized his calm, measured tone. "The rejection is more aggressive than we hoped." My father's voice was low, strained. "The anti-rejection drugs are having severe side effects. His doctors say he needs another transplant, and soon. The waiting list is years long." A pause. Then my mother's voice, sharp and precise as a scalpel. "So, if the other one was a match." My blood ran cold. I strained to listen, every nerve in my body suddenly, painfully awake. Dr. Finch's reply was firm, laced with disbelief. "Ma'am, I think you're misunderstanding. Cora has only one kidney left. We can't just take it." She would not survive. She would need to be on dialysis for the rest of her life, and her system is already incredibly fragile. It would be a death sentence. "But Leo has his whole future ahead of him," my dad cut in, his voice thick with a desperate, warped logic. "He's got the scholarship offers, the internship. He's going to be someone. Cora, she's a sweet girl, but she's quiet. She lives in her own little world. She doesn't have that same drive. She's already limited," my mother added, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "The doctors said with one kidney she'll have to be careful. No strenuous sports, potential complications with pregnancy down the line. Her life is already compromised. This would be a sacrifice. A meaningful one. Her life would mean something." "Mean something?" Dr. Finch's voice was dangerously quiet now. "You are talking about ending your daughter's life to prolong your son's. You are asking me, as her doctor, to murder her." "Don't be so dramatic," my mother snapped. For once, she could do something truly important for this family. The world stopped. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It wasn't just that they preferred him. That was a truth I had lived with my entire life. This was something else entirely. This was a calculation. A transaction. They were weighing my life against his future and finding mine lacking. I was not their daughter, lying broken in a hospital bed. I was a resource. A spare part. I pulled the thin, starchy sheet over my head, muffling the sob that tore from my throat. My body was a prison of pain and tubes, but my mind was screaming. I wanted to rip the IVs from my arms and run until the city of Bridgeport was just a memory, but I could barely move. Hot, silent tears soaked into the pillowcase, each one a testament to the death of a hope I never even knew I held so dearly, the hope that, when it mattered most, I would be enough. In the suffocating darkness beneath the sheet, a strange, cold clarity began to form. They had shown me my value in their eyes. Now I had to find my own. I lay there, listening to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, and made a vow. I would not be a sacrifice. I would not be a footnote in my brother's story. I would survive. And I would build a life so full and so bright that it would cast its own shadow, a life they could never touch, never measure, and never, ever claim. The little girl who sketched in the corners was gone. A survivor was being born in the sterile silence of room 314. The next morning, the world looked different. The fluorescent lights seemed less harsh, the antiseptic smell less suffocating. It was the landscape of a battlefield I now knew I had to escape. When the morning nurse, a kind woman named Maria, came to check my vitals, I found my voice. It was weak, raspy, but steady. "Maria," I whispered, "could I please speak with the hospital's social worker? I don't want my parents to know." She looked at me, her brown eyes full of a sudden, deep concern. She saw something in my face, in the desperate quiet of my request. She didn't ask why. She just nodded. "Of course, sweetie. I'll arrange it." That afternoon, a woman with a gentle face and a vibrant, sari-inspired scarf draped over her shoulders entered my room. She introduced herself as Ms. Anya Sharma. She pulled a chair close to my bed and sat, her presence a pool of calm in my turbulent world. She didn't open a notepad or click a pen. She just waited, her gaze patient and kind. Telling her was one of the hardest things I have ever done. The words felt like shards of glass in my throat. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. In a low, steady monotone, I recounted the conversation I had overheard. I repeated my mother's words. Her life would mean something. Miss Sharma didn't flinch. She listened until I was finished, her expression a careful mixture of professional empathy and quiet resolve. When I fell silent, the hum of the machines filling the space between us, she finally reached out and laid a hand gently on my arm, over the blanket. "Cora," she said, and hearing my name spoken with such simple, direct humanity felt like a balm. "Thank you for telling me. I want you to know that you are safe now. We will not let anything happen to you." That was the moment the ground solidified beneath me again. Miss Sharma was a force of quiet efficiency. Within 24 hours, my world was transformed. A formal ethics complaint was filed by the hospital against my parents. Dr. Finch provided a statement, his voice on the recording a calm, damning testament to their request. A temporary protective order was placed, barring my parents from my room and from making any medical decisions on my behalf. A small sign was placed on my door, "Staff and authorized personnel only." I had never felt so terrified and yet so profoundly free. My room was no longer a cage, but a sanctuary. Of course, my parents did not take this quietly. I was dozing when the commotion erupted down the hall. I could hear my mother's shrill voice echoing in the corridor. "She is our daughter. You have no right. That woman is poisoning her mind." I pushed myself up, peering through the small window in my door. I saw them, security guards flanking them, their faces contorted with rage and disbelief. My father was pointing, his face red. My mother was screaming at the head nurse. "She belongs to us." But I didn't. Not anymore. I had seen behind the curtain, and I could never unsee it. The next few weeks were a quiet whirlwind of healing, both physical and emotional. Nurses would come in and give my hand a little squeeze. Dr. Finch made a point of stopping by every day, not just to check my incision, but to talk to me about my drawings, about the books I was reading. He told me, "You have a strength in you, Cora, that has nothing to do with how many kidneys you have. Because I was still a minor, just 4 months shy of my 18th birthday, the path forward was complicated. Miss Sharma guided me through it all. With the hospital's recordings and my testimony, a judge granted a legal separation. I was officially a ward of the state. I would be discharged into foster care. The day I left the hospital, Maria, the nurse who had first helped me, gave me a hug. "You build a good life, you hear?" she whispered, tears in her eyes. I promised her I would. My foster home was a small, second-story apartment in a modest building in the Selwood neighborhood, run by a kind but weary woman named Sandra. My room was tiny, with a lumpy mattress and a window that overlooked a brick wall. But it was mine. The space was sacred. It was the first room I had ever occupied that was not owned or defined by the Marlowe family. It was the first piece of the new world I was building. I finished my high school credits online, my textbooks spread across a small, second-hand desk. The public library became my haven. After my scars healed enough, I got a job at a sprawling, beloved local bookstore, Hawthorne Books. I spent my evenings surrounded by the scent of aging paper and ink, shelving books, the quiet murmur of fellow book lovers, a soothing soundtrack to my new life. I saved every dollar I earned, tucking it away in a bank account that had only one name on it, Cora. I refused any offers of college financial aid that were tied to my parents. I didn't want a single thread connecting me to them. I started at Bridgeport Community College, paying my own way, and then transferred to the State University. I studied urban design, fascinated by the way spaces could be created to foster community and well-being, to make people feel like they belonged. The day I turned 18, I walked into the county courthouse and legally changed my name. I shed Marlowe like a skin I had outgrown. I chose Sterling, my maternal grandmother's maiden name. She had been a painter, a quiet woman who had always seen the world in color and light, who had always encouraged my art. Cora Sterling. It sounded like me. The years passed. Not quietly, but with purpose. I graduated with honors. I took an entry-level position at a progressive architecture and urban planning firm called Confluence Collaborative. Their motto was building spaces, connecting people. It resonated with every fiber of my being. I poured myself into my work, not with the frantic ambition my parents had revered in Leo, but with a deep, abiding passion. I loved the challenge of transforming neglected urban lots into vibrant community gardens, of designing public spaces that were accessible and beautiful. My quiet nature, once seen as a weakness, became a strength. I was a keen observer. I listened. I saw things others missed. I moved from a tiny studio to a small one-bedroom apartment with a view of the Willamette River. I would sit on my balcony in the evenings, sketching the bridges and the city lights, feeling a sense of peace that was more valuable than any inheritance. I had built this life. Every brick, every beam was my own. Within 5 years, my work on several high-profile community renewal projects had earned me a reputation. I was made a junior partner at Confluence. At 26, I was leading my own team. My life was full. I had a small, close-knit circle of friends, a career I loved, and a quiet, unshakable sense of self-worth. The ghosts of room 314 were mostly silent. Until the day an email landed in my inbox from Human Resources. It was a list of final-round candidates for a project manager position on a new, large-scale development I was overseeing. And there, near the bottom of the list, was the name, Leo Vance. My heart didn't stop. It didn't pound. It just gave a single, hard thud, like a stone dropping into a deep well. I clicked open his resume. It was adequate. A decent state university, a string of respectable but uninspired jobs at various corporate firms. There was a photo, the same charming grin, a little older, a little more tired around the eyes, but unmistakably him. He had no idea. The firm was Confluence Collaborative. The hiring partner was C. Sterling. He would never make the connection. For a moment, the old Cora surfaced, the small, hurt girl who wanted to print the resume and dramatically slash through it with a red pen. But she was just a whisper now. The woman I had become, Cora Sterling, was calmer. More curious. What would happen if I met him? Not as his broken little sister, but as the woman who held his professional future in her hands. The thought wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. It was about seeing, once and for all, if the sun still had the power to burn me. I replied to HR, "Please schedule an in-person interview with Mr. Vance. I'll handle it myself." The day of the interview, a soft Bridgeport rain was falling outside my office window. My office was on the 15th floor, with a panoramic view of the city I had helped to reshape. The walls were adorned not with awards, but with framed architectural sketches and photographs of finished community parks, children playing in the spaces I had helped create. I was sitting behind my large, reclaimed wood desk when my assistant buzzed. "Miss Sterling, your 10 o'clock appointment, Mr. Vance, is here." "Send him in." "Thank you," I said, my voice even. He walked in, looking confident in a well-tailored but slightly frayed suit. He had his resume in a leather portfolio, his charming candidate smile already in place. He looked at me, the smile faltering as he tried to place my face. Recognition dawned slowly, then crashed over him like a tidal wave. His mouth fell open. The portfolio slipped from his fingers, scattering papers across the floor. "Cora," he whispered, the name sounding foreign and ancient. "Hello, Leo," I said, my voice calm. I didn't stand. "It's been a long time." He just stared, his eyes darting around the spacious office, at the view, at the nameplate on my desk, "Cora Sterling, partner." "But you, what, how?" he stammered, scrambling to pick up his papers. "I got better," I said simply. "I built a life. Please have a seat." He sank into the chair opposite me, looking utterly bewildered. The power dynamic, the one that had defined our entire lives, had not just shifted, it had inverted. I had no idea," he said, shaking his head. "We thought, after you left the foster system, we didn't know where you went. We thought maybe," he trailed off, unable to say the word, "that I had faded away." I offered, without malice, "That I had fulfilled the expectation of being limited?" He flinched, the word landing with surgical precision. "No, Cora, I am so sorry. For everything. For the accident. For not visiting. I was a kid. I was stupid and scared and selfish." I listened. I heard the words. But I had spent a decade building a world without them, and they had no power to unmake it now. "I appreciate the sentiment, Leo," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I'm not the 17-year-old girl you left in that hospital. The apology you owe is to her, and she's not here anymore." I folded my hands on the desk. "Let's talk about why you're here today. You've applied for the project manager position." He looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe we were proceeding. "Yes, I have. I need this job, Cora." "Tell me why you think you're a good fit for Confluence," I said, shifting into my professional role. He tried. He spoke about his experience, his skills, but his words were hollow. His gaze kept flicking back to my face, still reeling from the shock. He was trying to interview with a ghost. When he finished, I leaned forward slightly. "Leo, this company is built on a foundation of trust, community, and integrity. We design spaces that are meant to be safe, inclusive, and nurturing. That ethos is not just something we sell to clients, it's something we live internally. It's the core of who we are." I paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. The last time we were in a position of vulnerability together, my family, our family, decided that my life was disposable. That my body was a commodity to be harvested for your benefit. They made a choice based on a perceived value of our futures. Tears welled in his eyes. He looked down at his hands. "I wasn't part of that conversation, Cora. I swear." "Were you?" I asked softly. "Or were you just the silent beneficiary?" "You were the sun, Leo. It's easy not to notice the shadows when you're the one casting them." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the rain-swept city below. "I can't give you this job. Not because I want to punish you. I have no interest in ruining your life. But I have a responsibility to protect this space, this company, this life that I built from the ashes of the one we shared. Bringing you into it would be a betrayal of everything I have worked for. It would be letting the past colonize the present. It's not about revenge. It's about a boundary. A necessary one." He sat in silence for a long moment, the fight draining out of him. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, the charming smile gone, replaced by a raw, naked shame. "Okay," he whispered, his voice cracking. He stood up, his shoulders slumped. "I understand." He turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. "For what it's worth, the life you've built, it's incredible, Cora. You're incredible." And then he was gone. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound, quiet, and complete sense of peace. The stone had been dropped in the well, and I had finally heard it hit the bottom. The last ghost of room 314 had been laid to rest. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and looked out at the city lights beginning to sparkle in the twilight. The rain had stopped. A few months later, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address, but I recognized the elegant, slanted script of my mother's handwriting. I opened it with steady hands. It was a plea. My father had lost his job, some poor investments had gone south, and Leo was struggling to find work. They were on the verge of losing the house in Laurelhurst, the house that had been the entire stage for our family's drama. They were asking for help. They signed it, "Your loving parents." I read the letter twice. The Cora of 10 years ago would have ripped it to shreds. The Cora of 5 years ago would have written a blistering reply. But the Cora I was now simply folded the letter and placed it on the counter. That evening, I sat on my balcony, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the boats on the river. The question of what to do with the letter wasn't a burden. It was simply a choice. Forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't about absolving others. It was about freeing yourself from the anchor of their actions. It didn't mean letting them back into your life. It meant not letting their memory dictate the terms of your peace. I could help them. I could send an anonymous check through a lawyer, enough to solve their immediate problem. A clean, detached act of charity that asked for nothing in return. Or I could do nothing. I could let the consequences of their choices play out, as the consequences of their choices for me had once been allowed to. I didn't know which I would choose. But for the first time, I knew the choice was entirely mine. It would be made from a place of strength and self-respect, not from a place of pain or obligation. Looking out at the vast, open sky above my city, my home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. They thought my story had ended in that hospital room. They never imagined that it was just the beginning. And the rest of it, I realized with a slow, peaceful smile, was still mine to write.